Hi there, Professor Malott. Today I want to talk to you about MLA formatting and style and citations and works cited and all that important stuff that you need to know in order to incorporate research into your writing. So an in-text citation is when you're referring to that text that you're referring to a source within your own writing. So the source information in a parenthetical citation should direct your readers to the source's entry in the works cited list. It should be placed where there's a natural pause in your text. So typically it's at the end of a quotation. If it's referring to a direct quotation, you're going to place it directly following the closing quotation mark. Occasionally, you may have it in the middle of a sentence, but try to keep it to the end of the sentence. And any source information that you provide in text must correspond to the source information in the works cited page. So whatever signal word or phrase you provide for your readers in the text must be the first thing that appears on the left-hand margin of the corresponding entry in the works cited list. So if it's the author's last name, you would have, if you're using the author's last name, that's going to show up in your works cited list. Or if you have a work that has no named author, then it would be the title of the essay or whatever work you happen to be quoting or borrowing from. So again, here's an example of how in-text, actually this is 3 examples, of how an in-text citation works. Here we have a signal phrase mentioning the author's last name, Wordsworth stated, and then we have the parenthetical reference, the page number. The second example says the same thing, but notice there is no mention of the author in the signal phrase. Instead, it just introduces the quote, and then we see the author and page number. That is the typical style for MLA quotations or paraphrases. And then this last one, again, we have the mention of the author, but instead this is a paraphrase of the quote. And then the works cited list is how this work would look. Its last name, comma, first name, the author's last name, comma, first name, then the title of the book, which is italicized, and then the publication information, and lastly, the publication date. And we don't have page numbers included in here. If we were referring just to a chapter within that book, then we would treat it differently, but this is just how the book shows up in the works cited page. Next one, we have a print source with an author. So for print sources like books and magazines or academic journals that have articles, newspapers, and so on, you need to provide a signal word or phrase, which is usually the author's name, and a page number. If you provide the signal word or phrase in the sentence, you don't need to include it in the parenthetical citation. So we have here, humans have been described by Kenneth Burke as symbol-using animals. So here we're mentioning the author, so we don't need to include it in the parenthetical citation. However, here is an example where the author is not mentioned in the sentence, so the last name is included in the parenthetical citation. So next is how do we cite a work that doesn't have a known author? When we don't have a known author, which is often the case with some magazine articles or newspaper articles or anything you might find on the web, you might not have an author who is named. So you need to refer instead to the article, the title of the article. So use a shortened title of the work instead of what would be the author's name. You place that title in quotation marks because it is either an essay or an article. if it's a short work, or italicize it if it's a website or a book, etc. Plays, books, television shows, entire websites, and then provide a page number. So in this example, since the reader does not know the author of the article, an abbreviated title of the article appears in the parenthetical citation. You see here, we have, quote, impact of global warming, end quote, and then a page number. So this will show up in your works cited. Impact, it may be a longer title, impact of global warming, blah, 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 and then it will have the rest of the information. But that way, your reader would know where to find this information in your works cited list. Hopefully that makes sense. So when the author and the title are not known or are not enough, you need to include a differentiating piece of information, such as an editor or a translator, maybe the edition number, publisher, or publication date inserted in a square bracket after the title. Most of the times, I actually haven't seen this very often. Most of the time you don't run into that problem. So if two or more works by the same author have the same title, more information is needed to clearly reference a specific item in your work cited in square brackets. Again, I don't think you really need to concern yourself. And if you do run into that problem, you know where to look it up. You can look it up on Purdue OWL, or you can look it up on MLA, or if you're writing for a class that uses APA citation style, then you would look it up at the appropriate place. And then this is how the works cited listing would look for that example that I pulled up first in 2 slides ago. This is how it would look. The impact of global warming in North America. So if we go back, we see the shortened version, impact of global warming. You use what, 2 or 3 words, right? In the works cited list, we have the whole title, the impact of global warming in North America. So the reason that we shorten it in our parenthetical references is if we used whole titles of articles, especially if you're using scholarly articles, some of those titles can be really long, as some of you may have seen. So it's a good idea to get into the habit of shortening things a bit. Notice also, this shortening dropped the article the, right? See how it is here, the impact, and they dropped it here. So we have impact of global warming, and in your works cited list, anything that starts with an article, the or a or an, is not italicized. We go by the first real the first real word, the first non-article word in the title. So this would come in the I's, right? The impact of global warming, and then we have the publication, the date, and then here is when that was accessed. So while this entry is technically correct, it would help readers more readily access the source if you include the URL. So we have an access date, which kind of indicates that there's a website that this person could go to find this article. So it's a good idea to include the URL. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. So other in-text citations, authors with same last names, we resort to using first initials to differentiate between the authors. That way we know where to look, once again, who is saying what, where this information has been paraphrased from. So that's a handy thing to know. Again, you can always look it up. Other in-text citations, a work by multiple authors. So If the entry of the works cited list begins with the names of 2 authors, you will include both last names in the in-text citation. So you see here, this example has 2 named authors, Strong and Ellis, and in your works cited, it would show up as under Strong because that's the first author. However, if you have an article or an essay that's been written by 3 or more authors, then we go with the in-text examples here. We use the little phrase et al. Et al means and others. It's a little Latin abbreviation. So we have the first author who is named and then et al. So we see Smith et al. Argues. This is a signal phrase that for gun control, yada, yada, yada. And then in this one, the authors state, and they introduce the quote there, and then the parenthetical reference Smith et al. With the page number. So that's important information to know. So you're not naming 17 different authors from a scholarly journal. Multiple works by the same author. Again, you can look this up. I'm not going to take too much time to dwell on that. The rest of these slides, I think, are all things that you can go and look up. Works in time-based media. If you are referring to a video, which in some of my classes we do this, there is usually a timestamp that you can put in your parenthetical citation. And then sources without page numbers. So this is handy if you have like a PDF handout from a class that doesn't have any page numbers on it, or if your source is something that you found on the web. So when a source has no page numbers or any other kind of part number, you're not going to give a number in the parenthetical citation. So you're not going to count unnumbered paragraphs, pauses, or other parts. If you have a piece and there are little paragraph numbers, then you can refer to paragraph numbers, but nobody expects you to count pages or count paragraphs or anything like that. You can just refer to the work itself. So this is an example of how to cite a direct quotation from an oral address, a speech. So we have the in-text example. The person has quoted from this person, Garland Thompson. And then the works cited entry here is Garland Thompson, Rosemarie, blah, blah, blah. And we know that it is what type of source it is. So it could be, you know, a speech or a website or what have you. So if you have, again, a known author or a known speaker, you can cite them. If you don't know the person's name or if there is no named author, then you would go by the title of the work once again. So there's also, I've made reference to this before, the differences between formatting short quotations in prose as opposed to long quotations in prose. We are primarily dealing with prose in first year composition, at least in Comp 1. So here is an in-text example. According to some, dreams express, according to some, pay attention to the punctuation, dreams express profound aspects of personality. And we have the author and page number there, quote, and comma, though others disagree. According to Volk's study, dreams may express profound aspects of personality. So this is similar to the Wordsworth example that we had early on in the talk. And so it's just a matter of where you put your citation. So if a prose quotation runs no more than 4 lines, and it doesn't require any special emphasis, you put the quotation mark, put it in quotation marks and incorporate it into the text. Then you would provide the author and specific page citation in the text and include a complete entry in the works cited page. Punctuation marks such as periods, commas, and semicolons should appear after the parenthetical citation. So you see here, we have a comma after this, although I personally would wait until the end of the sentence and place it here, but you see the period for this sentence comes outside of the parenthetical reference. The question mark for this sentence or this question comes outside of the parentheses. Question marks and exclamation points should appear within quotation marks if they're a part of that quoted passage. So if this had been a question, profound aspects of personality, question mark, that would stay there, and then you would end it with a period after your citation. Just a lot of nitpicky little things. So that's for anything that you quote. Any direct quotations that are 4 lines or less within your paper. It doesn't have to be 4 lines of prose taken from a book or what have you, whatever type of work you're referring to. But as long as it's 4 lines or less in your paper. However, if you have a quote that's a big long quote, it's over 4 lines of prose, you treat it differently. So quotations that are 5 or more lines, you start the quotation on a new line with the entire quote indented 1/2 inch from your left margin. So just like if you were starting a new paragraph, but every line of that quote is going to be indented. We call this a block quote. So you're also maintaining double spacing. You're not going to do any kind of special formatting within Word. You're not going to use words, italics or the special quotation formatting. Let's see. Maintain the double spacing is what I was saying. Don't indent the first line an extra amount. So don't double indent it. Keep it all nicely aligned. Or add quotation marks that aren't present in the original. So see here, we have the signal phrase that introduces the quote, which you always should be using. You need to introduce your quotes. You don't just drop them there in the middle without any kind of introduction or explanation. So we have this introductory phrase here, and notice that it's set off with a colon. And that kind of alerts the reader, hey, something big is coming up, pay attention, right? Here's a nice big long chunk of text that I have taken as an example from Wuthering Heights. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of prose that have been set off in this block quotation. But notice there is no quotation mark here or here. We eliminate the quotation marks. Why? Who knows? That's just how it's done in MLA. This is a nice big long chunk of text that we don't need to use quotation marks for because we know, by the way, that it has been introduced and also that it is offset here in a block. The other thing that's different from the shorter quotations, you remember how I said that the ending punctuation comes after our parenthetical reference? Well, in the long block, we keep the original punctuation, and then we tag on our little parenthetical reference. No punctuation after that. Why? Again, who knows? That's MLA for you. But there you have it. That's the block quotation. Once again, I know that I've talked about it before, but it never hurts to repeat these things. Then there are a couple of slides on how to format short quotations in poetry. So if, for example, you're using poetry or song lyrics, they are indicated a little bit differently, so you can read up on these. We use slashes between between lines and double slashes between stanzas, and then block quotations for 3 or more lines of poetry. And then you try to format it as accurately as possible. So if you're using poetry from like, oh, let's say E.E. Cummings, who tended to use a lot of unusual formatting and, you know, punctuation in the middle of words, and you want to replicate that as accurately as you possibly can in your paper. But as I said, we're not really dealing with poetry in Comp 1. Adding and omitting words, I know that I've also addressed this using the ellipses. If you want to omit some words and adding words where, you know, it just helps you to make sense, you use the brackets. So that is it for in-text citations. So now let's get on to the basics of works cited.